Now it's getting exciting and more exciting by the minute. Next on to a very important panel discussion on environmental justice and community benefits. Participants in the panel are Þorgerður María Þorbjarnardóttir, Chair of Landvernd, the Icelandic Environment Association, Micheal Leitch, Senior Technical Lead at XPRIZE Carbon Removal, Todd Schaef, Senior Research Scientist and Team Lead of the Geochemistry Group at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and Vande, Linde, Director of School Trust Lands at the state of Minnesota. And to moderate the panel discussion, we have William Gallin, Senior Environmental Geologist at the engineering and environmental science consulting firm GSI Environmental. The floor is yours. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Will Gallin. I'm with GSI Environmental. I'm a geologist there. We're a company that does, we work on the UIC Class 6 permits, writing those applications for companies that are looking to sequester CO2. And we also work on MRV plans for those projects as well. And I want the panel to introduce themselves. We've got Þorgerður María Þorbjarnardóttir, and she is the chairperson of the Icelandic Environmental Association, Landvernd. We've got Todd Schaef over here, sorry, not in order. Todd Schaef is the subsector manager and subsurface energy systems at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, and we'll be referring to that as PNNL for short. We've got Micheal Leitch, who is the senior technical lead from XPRIZE for carbon removal. And we've got Aaron, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Aaron Vandelin, I'm the School Trust Lands Director for the state of Minnesota. I usually only talk about school trust lands, so I'm a little out of my element today, but Mr. Davies, I would submit to you that I am the bridge between the policymakers that you want to reach. So school trust lands in Minnesota, 1.5 million acres of productive forest where we were actually looking for carbon and carbon storage opportunities. And then this, a new definition for those, that geologic carbon sequestration is what we are calling it in Minnesota. We have 12 million acres of mineral estate in Minnesota that not all of it would be available for this, but I think a large portion of it would be, and one small deposit in Aiken, Minnesota that was on the Department of Energy's slide has the potential, from what I'm told, again, not a scientist, an attorney by training, 16 gigatons. I think I got that right, of mineralization. Am I going too far?
No, not just.
I think Minnesota's a unique case study, especially for this topic. We do not have the policies in place. We do not have the regulations in place. And from an environmental justice standpoint and a community engagement standpoint, make no mistake, the state of Minnesota is covered by treaties that we made with the Native American population in our formation as a nation. 11 tribal nations in Minnesota. The entire state is under treaties, and we need to adhere to those treaties. We need to respect the rights that they've reserved, and I guess maybe not take advantage of the rights that they've granted to us, because I look at the treaties a little bit differently. A lot of people look at them as the bands or the nation's reserved rights, and I actually think it's a little bit different. I think they actually granted the settlers or the people moving in the rights to use the land. So we have a big undertaking in Minnesota just from an environmental justice standpoint, just because of the native tribal relations. And we've done some collaboration, and I got to just come clean. I'm filling in for Todd Mallon, who contracted COVID. So bear with me a little bit, but Todd got Heather Ahrens and I here from the state of Minnesota so that we could learn about this. I worked on legislation last year, and I'll speak to you, Mr. Davies, real quick, because that backfired gloriously on us. We are not an oil and gas producing state in the United States. We do have a natural resource-based economy, but we do not produce oil and gas like North Dakota, which is right next door. So we don't have the carbon, we don't have CCS where it's just storage, and we're looking at sequestering it in our olivine deposits mainly. And we thought we had a good package go into the legislature last year, and it was to create simply a task force to study carbon mineralization. A task force. Pretty innocuous, right? No. It failed miserably. We actually got legislation introduced that was counter to that task force, and that legislation would have restricted all CO2 pipelines across the state of Minnesota. So groups are talking past each other. They are not collaborating is the way I think they should or could be. I know Todd Mallon is with Talon has actually engaged tribal governments and tribal economic development companies in this aspect at his project.
I think we'll talk a little bit more about that
thanks for shutting
later
me off,
in the session.
I get paid by the word.
So I want people to go through and introduce themselves also, and then we'll get into a
I know. I told you. That's why I asked you to stop me early.
Okay. So Þorgerður, can you introduce yourself,
yes.
please?
Yeah, my name is Þorgerður María Þorbjarnardóttir. I am the chairperson of Landvernd. I did my bachelor's in geology, and I was actually very interested in geochemistry. So I've been looking at Carbfix for a long time, and I'm extremely proud of this method that has been produced by the innovation environment in Iceland. And then I did my master's degree in conservation leadership in the University of Cambridge. So it was way more community-based than the hard science I did before. So that was a little bit of a jump. So I feel that I am aware of so many of the problems that can come with solutions and implementing them through that sort of a lens of leadership and community. And I'm looking forward to talking with you today. Yeah.
Thanks. Next, Mike Leitch.
Hi everyone. My name is Michael Leitch. I'm a senior technical lead at XPRIZE. We're a not-for-profit based in the US. We run technology competitions, and I lead the technical operations for the $100 million XPRIZE carbon removal. So we launched in 2021. We've awarded $20 million to date in about, I think, 38 awards. And we're just in the final year of the competition. We started the competition with about 1,600 registrants, and over the last 3.5 years, we've winnowed the field down to 20 finalists, and those finalists are about halfway through their one-year demos to prove out their CDR solutions. And we're looking forward to making the final $80 million in awards next spring on Earth Day next year. So. I think one of the reasons, environmental justice for us has been an important part of the program. When you think about 1,600 new entrants into the CDR space, all sort of starting to do demos, and the vast majority of those are small startups with just 1 or 2 or maybe up to 10 employees. Is very exciting. It's been great to see the explosion of interest in the space, but it's also like a lot of opportunity to sort of get things wrong, And so we tried to build a pretty strong program around environmental justice and responsible deployment. And that's been a really exciting part of the program for me.
Thanks, Mike. And then Todd, can you introduce yourself, please?
You bet. So, hi, my name is Todd Schaef. I am a researcher at Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. I'm an in situ mineralization guy. I work a lot with the Carbfix team, so I'm very familiar with their process. I do a lot of work in the fossil energy carbon management portfolio, and almost every one of those projects has a community engagement component to it. So myself and my team, We are very interested in engaging with the community. We don't do regulations. We don't do permitting. We do the science. We are a resource for the community. We come in and help the communities understand what's happening in that community, what could happen in that community. We give them the science and the information to make an informed decision. So I'm super excited to be on the panel here as well and to start talking about some of these issues.
And I'll just say, as somebody who's working on permits, that there is a lot of science in there. There's the geologic site characterization. It's not all, paperwork, checking off boxes, but there's important geology that goes on in there too. But to start off, as a geologist, I'm in awe of Iceland, from a perspective of geology, but I'm also in awe from a perspective of this country's use of renewable energy. But Þorgerður, a lot of your work involves pointing out that there are costs to the renewable energy industry here, and how do you see mineralization fitting into those costs?
Yeah, so what we have been pointing towards is that we are facing a triple planetary crisis. It's climate change, it's loss of biodiversity and pollution. And we are very focused in our work to try to manage those crises. We tend to focus a lot on what we can do and very little on what we should actually be stop doing. So in our work, we have pointed towards that, for example, the energy, it always wants to expand, so we want to transition away from fossil fuels, and in that way we want to just make more electricity rather than thinking, so we have this resource, we make a lot of electricity, and what should we use it for, and maybe transitioning from fossil fuels is a better use than we are doing for something else in the moment. And in a way, I think we are seeing a lot of increased pressure on resources. We're seeing increased pressure from climate projects, but also just everything else for water, for land, and we really think that we should be prioritizing better. And I definitely think that we should be prioritizing climate projects above maybe something else that is less sort of important right now. But in the same time, we cannot just go ahead of ourselves and ignore signs that the projects that we are doing are having an impact on biodiversity. And we should make sure that the research is being thoroughly done. And we're looking at the negative impacts that mineralization or anything else can do if it's a climate project. And we shouldn't sort of discard it because it is a climate-friendly project. So we need to always be sort of looking at that balance and and in a way sort of prioritizing these projects, but also making sure that we're not sort of scaling up too fast, and then we end up with a different crisis sort of emerging towards us.
Okay. Thanks. Mike, when you think about those costs and benefits as well, when you've been working on projects, you mentioned all the different projects around the world. When you're looking at those, what environmental safeguards do those projects have in place? Especially in parts of the world where there might not be government mandates that they have those rules. Like, what have you seen? What are some of the positives and what are some of the deficiencies?
Yeah, I think it's, it's the carbon removal space. We've all come into carbon removal, I think, first and foremost because we care about the planet and we're trying to do good. And I think with all of the groups that we've been working with over the years, there has been a genuine, desire to do good by the environment beyond just carbon impacts. But on the other hand, when you're kind of in the trenches and you're trying to get the project done and you're really spending all of your days thinking about just like counting carbon molecules, it can be easy to sort of either forget about or downplay some of the other impacts. And you did a great great job of pointing that out.
Thank you.
You know, it's not just the the injection well, and that the impact of a project isn't limited to just that. You know, it has to do with the footprint of the energy infrastructure and the logistical infrastructure that goes into any one of these projects. So, I think one of the sort of from a technical point of view, we've really been focused on making sure that teams understand sort of the whole cradle to grave and the big picture nature of the projects that they're proposing, and then really kind of getting beyond just the what boxes do I need to check to get the permits when it comes to getting ready for deployment. And that's really where the environmental justice and responsible deployment programming comes into play, because if you just focus on like, okay, well, what does the state require of me, or what does the national authority require of me? What you'll find is that you'll meet stiff resistance on the ground. And we've seen that play out in the competition, and there have been some other, well-documented examples of that, outside of the competition as well. So I think we're seeing that play out, and people who are sort of learning those lessons in real time are really shifting, and shifting their approach and really getting quite a bit closer to the local communities that'll ultimately provide the social license to operate. But I think we're also finding that new entrants to the space are investing a lot more up front in terms of staff and resources and training and time to engage with local communities before they start, because they realize the stakes are still are high.
Yeah, and that's what I hear a lot, is the importance of getting that conversation started well before you get moving on the technical aspect. Todd, you work on a project that involves critical mineral resource extraction in situ with negative carbon emissions. The same week that the FOA, the funding opportunity announcement came out for that project that you're working on, was the same week that Russia invaded Ukraine. And there's the Norilsk nickel deposit, which is a sub-basalt deposit in Siberia. So it's important from a security aspect to make sure that we can obtain these critical minerals, but also do it in an environmentally friendly way. So what aspects of your work have you seen where it's important, not just from a security aspect to determine the location of where you're exploring, but also from an environmental aspect?
Sure. So if you think about moving forward in the critical mineral space, there's no way that we can get from where we are right now to a green energy economy in 2050 without developing new resources and new technologies. The big deposits, there are not very many left. So we have to be strategic, we have to be innovative on how we go after these new resources. New resources are going to be lower concentrations. We can't use traditional mining techniques to do that. We have to turn to states like Minnesota, where you have a resource that's never been utilized. You have tribal nations that own these resources. And so you start to work on technologies that have a carbon benefit, so you can sequester the CO2, and then you also have a critical mineral extraction component. So now all of a sudden you have an economic incentive that would be more palatable to tribal nations, and you also have a more environmental friendly technology. You try to take into consideration resources in the region. If you can develop technologies that don't use as much water, or don't have a very large footprint on the surface, or have some geochemistries in them that are more environmentally friendly. They're not super acidic, or they're not going to create big mine tailing ponds and waste piles. Those are the things that we're working on. We're trying to develop technologies that are much more environmentally friendly, so we can go to that economy that you want. We can have more solar panels, more wind turbine, more electric cars, more batteries, things like that. I think that's where we need to be focused right now, are those disruptive, innovative technologies that provide benefits to communities.
And I think that the Inflation Reduction Act, which funds a lot of the technological research right now on CDR, they euphemistically describe certain countries as entities of concern, but it's interesting, that's from a security aspect. Countries that they don't want people sourcing technology from, it also tends to overlap with the same countries where there might not be a responsible environmental record for how these are being developed too. So it's an interesting overlap of both security and environmental. So that was sort of I wanted to cover some of the environmental topics first, but then this is both an environmental and a community benefits panel. So Todd, I wanted to ask you about pore space. Oh, sorry, not Todd.
Aaron.
Yeah, so replacing Todd Malin, sorry, Aaron.
I'll be Todd.
Yeah, the second Todd for the day.
You're the third Todd.
You're the third Todd. Oh, you're the second. Okay.
So all Todds are important. So in the U.S. there's something we've got pore space ownership, and we also have mineral rights. So mineral rights, if you've got the right to the subsurface where you're going to extract, but there's also pore space, this new concept where the surface right. The person who owns the surface land has the right to inject CO2 into the spaces in between the rock. And that seems to be a good opportunity for disadvantaged communities to benefit from sequestration, because as the surface right owner, they can lease out the rights to the pore space. So how is that playing out in Minnesota? And as a follow-up to that, I'll get to the follow-up later.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry I went a little long earlier because it's not playing out in Minnesota.
Okay.
It's a great question, and you're talking to a minerals attorney about pore space and mineral rights. So I will be very careful what I say. We tried the legislation last year. We wanted to get we had in the legislative package the ability to lease the surface and the pore space. We had a task force that was going to pull a big community group together, a stakeholder group. I really don't like stakeholder group, but and then we had a technical group that was going to provide all the regulations that we needed. We didn't even know what regulations we needed because we don't have any for oil and gas. We don't have any for CDR, geologic carbon sequestration. We call it GCS. I'm sorry, another new term. But we can't get to leasing. We can't figure out our royalties because we don't know any of this stuff yet. We literally are 2 years behind where all the research is. So when you talk about community engagement, and just said it a second ago, you got to start early. I think I'm the bridge to the policymakers and the legislators who I work with to try to get these things passed. And if I don't understand it, and I'm focused on forest carbon and 1.5 million acres of trees that are going to, store 15 tons of carbon annually, or I can look at a mineral and say 16 gigatons. Where am I going to put my money? Where am I going to put my effort? But we don't know what we don't know. So we can't lease state lands right now. We can't inject right now. We don't know who our regulators were going to be. But I think it's definitely an opportunity for some of those disadvantaged communities to come in and see what the benefits from a green economy are going to be to them. And but there's a lot of questions about injection.
And I think that's
we'll get there.
Yeah. And that's following up on Chris's previous talk, that's a call to speak to the policymakers. There are 15 states in the U.S. that have pore space ownership law. Yep. There are fewer states that have law about which states can lease state lands. But it is it's something that we need to catch up on. An interesting situation is you work on a project where there's Todd. You work on a project where there's there's both minerals involved, the nickel, and there's also CO2 sequestration. So either you or Aaron, are you aware of how you if you've got a project that's both using mineral rights and pore space, is there any system set up for that right now?
I'm not aware of any system set up for that.
Yeah. Are you, Aaron? So if you're
No, sir.
Yeah. So this is all leading back to the issue of having to get to the policymakers.
Yep.
In terms of, this has all been US focused, but in terms of internationally, Mike or Þorgerður, are you aware of like how is community engagement mandated in other countries? Like, are there, in the US we've got NEPA and SEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, so where there are built-in ways for, not just ways, but it's mandated that the community has a voice in when one of these projects is going forward. What's the case in Europe? What's the case elsewhere? Do you know? Do either of you know?
Unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with that, no. But I am familiar with how it is done here. And I think that Carbfix has done an amazing job in terms of explaining the science. You can have very complicated graphs, and you can have like a slide with this much text, and then it goes like completely over the public's head. But I feel that what Carbfix has done is to sort of speak human language, so to say. And also I've had the opportunity, and more people have had the opportunity to look at the course, the drilling course, and to touch them and look at them and see, okay, it's right there. And I think that's very important, and I hope that they're doing that elsewhere as well.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, are you aware of what community engagement is like, from a government perspective, but also if there isn't one, then how are the XPRIZE teams going about trying to get that engagement?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific mandates. There may or may not be. I suspect more not than there are. But I think the consequence of getting it wrong is too big to ignore. It really can break a project, right? And if not break a project, it could delay it by years. And we've seen that happen. There have been teams competing in the XPRIZE who have been delayed substantially or had to move to a new place, move their operations to a new place because they kind of missed, sort of misfired in their initial plans. But I think the point that you made, Þorgerður, about the helping the lay people develop a more accurate mental model about what these projects are is so important, because otherwise it just people get freaked out when you talk about injecting CO2 underground. They think it's going to explode, or that their house foundations are going to burst, or and so I think there is an issue of getting accurate information out there and helping the general public. We can't assume that there's any technical fluency in many communities, and so we have to help them understand what it is that we're trying to do, and realistically what the risks are. We have to be very honest about what the risks are, in addition to sort of not over-promising on the benefit side.
And if I can add to that, I think a large part of why people don't trust projects like this is because there's so much going on, so much greenwashing in the world, and as soon as you're, because like your name is Chris, right? Yes, like you said, that you need to speak to the policymakers, you need to get them on your team. But what I really worry about is that people fall into the trap of saying like, oh, if you just do this, then you don't have to do all the other stuff. You don't have to reduce emissions, like this is the big solution. And that's a very dangerous trap, because then you completely lose trust from the public, from NGOs like Landvernd, if you feel that the companies are selling sort of a solution that I know the IPCC says you need to bind carbon, but and bind it down in rock or trees or whatever. You need to, and direct air capture is also important, or in any way that is possible. But then, at the other hand, you need to do all those other things as well. And as soon as like a carbon binding company or a person says like, if you do this, then you don't need to do anything else, then you lose completely trust of the public. And I really think also that you are in a position of pushing forward for more climate action. I know that as a climate activist, people know before I open my mouth what I'm going to say. We need more action, we need more funding. But when it comes from sort of a new angle, it can be very powerful. But I can understand the dilemma there, because then you also need them on your team, and they don't want to look at you as like an annoying sort of activist like me. So, yeah, but I think that's important when having the public's trust, is to be open with the risks and to listen to the communities, because they are worried, and they should be worried because it is new, and scaling up slowly and looking at the effects is important, but also to say, okay, we know we're doing this to tackle climate change, but this alone is not enough. And I'm very worried that it's going to, and I can already see it happening in Iceland, because we keep talking about how we use geothermal heating to heat up our houses. But when we implemented that, what actually happened is that we also increased emissions. And so when we start to bind more carbon, we cannot also keep increasing emissions, because then we really become a greenwashing machine when you try to say Iceland is very green and we're doing everything really well, if we're also, the numbers tell otherwise, just because we have some positive projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm based in Washington State, where we have a lot of basalt. There's the opportunity for mineralization. And the state has an energy strategy, and it's one of these 2050 net neutral strategies. And I think it's important. You were talking about how it's important that we don't turn away from reducing the emissions as well. I think it's important to note that in that state strategy, it's only 5% that's dedicated towards either terrestrial sequestration. That's we're a heavily forested state, so that's afforestation or reforestation, or geologic sequestration. So I think it's important to talk to the public about how. This is a very, it's ready, it's scalable, it's verifiable, but this is just one piece of a bigger puzzle that we have to fill in with reducing emissions. Todd, so as part of community benefits, an important aspect of that is education. You were talking about educating the public, whether it's in a public forum, but there's also education through like higher education. So what is your experience with education outreach?
So first of all, we never say we're going to educate the public. I think that just, no, that's, I hear
told
that,
me this before, yeah.
I hear that all the time. We do not educate anybody. We come in and we want to have a conversation, and we want to be able to tell you what's available for you to make an informed decision. So it's very important that we don't come across like that. And you're right, we need tools, we need pamphlets, we need messages that are common so everybody can understand that. And that is something that we are doing. We are making educational tools that you can hold in your hand, and we can explain how this process works. So that's one really good aspect of community engagement. The other is the Department of Energy has very good internship programs, and we love to go into our communities where we're going to have some of these projects, and we like to go into the educational institutions and bring those students into our programs and let them have these internships. And then all of a sudden, the young people in the community are a part of the program and a part of the project. And they go out with us into these workshops, talking to the moms and dads and explaining kind of what we're doing. And I think that type of entry point is so important, because now the community becomes a part of that project. And that you're going to see a lot more as you see the carbon safes moving forward and things along those lines. You'll see a lot more educational aspects where students come in, work on the projects, and present the results to the public.
Yeah, I think it's important both at that college level, but in any of those DOE-funded projects, is there money for getting the message out even younger, or is that not? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We went to a third grade class, and they're all face talkers. Yeah. Like right here in your face. And they are so excited. If you didn't have a code when you got there, you got it when you left. They are so excited. we brought a microscope for them to look at rocks. We just got them interested. And when we walked in the door, we asked, how many of you want to be a geologist? And nobody raised their hand. And at the end of the day, how many want to be a geologist? And they all raised their hand. So I've had moms call me the next day that said, oh, you just really excited my son. He wanted to call you last night at 10 o'clock, and I didn't let him. So there is so much interest with the young kids. And you can start in 3rd grade, and you can go all the way through middle school, high school. Middle school is a little more dicey because I've given presentations where kids' heads are on the table, and I'll ask them, if they have a question, it's like, at least sit up and ask me the question. But anyway, you meet them where they are. So yes, there's a lot of runway there for these programs. And these programs do have funding and expectations that you reach out to educational institutions.
And Þorgerður, you've been a teacher, is that correct as well?
Yes.
And in that work, is there awareness among younger people of mineralization, of what's going on?
So I was actually teaching Icelandic to non-Icelandic speaking adults.
Okay.
But there was actually a volcanic eruption going on, so I managed to teach them a lot of geology.
Yeah.
But I also do, as a ranger, I do education talks, and maybe it's the people that actually come to the talks who are already interested, but I really feel that people, they are interested in geology in Iceland, but at the same time, I did my bachelor in geology, and there was very few of us. And there is only like maybe between 10 and 20 people every year that actually sign up for a bachelor in geology in Iceland, which is, I don't know why.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting. Most people just go to engineering or something like that, even if they are interested in those things. But yeah, it's a puzzle to understand why, but I feel that the general public, because we have all these earthquakes, we have all these volcanoes, the general public are very well informed in terms of geology, and I've had people coming from the States, from universities who are working in the highlands where I worked as a ranger, and they're blown away by how much the public actually knows. And I think that's also a resource that should not be taken for granted, because then you have a population of people that can really read through scientific things such as like risk assessment of volcanic eruptions and stuff like that. And I really think that mineralization could really speak into that interest.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity. Another community benefit is economic. And so in Minnesota, when you are talking about mineralization projects, I'm curious about, like, when there is one of these projects, how long does job creation last? Like, if you build a facility, can you sell the idea to the community that this is going to be a job creator, or where are the economic benefits in this?
That is exactly what the economic benefits are, is the job creation. We don't have any carbon sequestration projects in Minnesota, so it hasn't produced any jobs or any economic, nothing. So,
but there's a potential for it?
There is potential, and there's potential, and you mentioned, the deposits. Minnesota has a top 5 world-class copper nickel deposit. We've known about it for decades. If we can actually get one of those projects off the ground and pair it with a geologic carbon sequestration project like Talon Metals. You're welcome, Todd. It would be a huge economic driver for the community. I mean, it's hundreds, if not, it's thousands of jobs in the initial startup, and those are all probably temp construction jobs but then after that, I don't know the numbers. Maybe you do, Todd.
I don't know the numbers, but if you think about that being a nucleation point, it's almost endless when you start to add these different technologies to that particular process right there. So it's a whole industry. I mean, if you look back at the oil and gas over the years, you had communities that didn't have anything, and all of a sudden they're booming. They've been booming for years. I envision that the same way, especially up in your state. You have so many opportunities that have carbon negative, and then they also can supply the critical minerals that the country needs for national security.
Mike, when you look at the XPRIZE teams, do they build into their applications information on what their economic benefit to local communities is going to be?
Yeah, so we basically, we basically at each round of the competition, we've asked the teams to fill in a questionnaire that outlines all of the strategy and action that they're taking both today and planning for scale and deployment in the future around responsible deployment. And but we've also there's a training aspect of it. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that there's quite a number of great resources available for folks in the whole community, right? From funders to project developers to students to help learn about this stuff. And so just wanted to plug a couple of those things. And one is a responsible deployment training tool that we developed in partnership with the Carbon Business Council. And it's like a pretty short little training video, but it's rich in information. And I think the real point is there's a lot of information out there. We're really not asking anyone, I think, to reinvent the wheel or cook up something from scratch. I mean, there's lots of opportunities for creativity in specific contexts, but there's lots of good information out there and good strategies and ideas for case studies, and ways that we can all sort of up our game. But yeah, I mean, long story short, to answer the question, yeah, we poll the teams on their plans. We use that as a bit of a screener. We want to make sure that there are no sort of serious red flags in terms of the deployment plans. And then we've tried to communicate our learnings from that. So we've published a couple of white papers over the years, basically sort of trying to synthesize some of the themes and the answers and make recommendations for how we can improve as a community and support scale of CDR from through this lens.
Thanks. So as our time runs down and we're getting closer to lunch, I wanted to give a chance for the audience to ask questions, but also if anybody else has like a final, statement, something that you didn't get out there that you want the audience to hear.
I just think when it comes to social science and sort of having community engagement, it's very often an afterthought. You start with a project and then you think, okay, maybe, oh yeah, we also need to include the social scientist and community engagement and make sure, and then it becomes really difficult for that person to actually do their job because they look at what you've already done and they're like, no, you should have done this differently actually. So community engagement and social science involvement in projects is not an afterthought. It's part of the whole thing, and I think that should be, if you take anything from this talk, that's something you should bear in mind.
Thanks. Yeah. And are there any questions? Yeah, in the middle.
Hi, Sue Dorward from Carbon Manager LLC in the United States. In my area, we have a hydrogen hub, and hopefully down the road we'll have some offshore carbon storage. The pushback we're seeing with the hydrogen hub from the community is that there are frontline communities that have had to deal with environmental damages over the years, which they blame sort of the chemicals and oil and gas industries for, and they see storage, and hydrogen as enabling oil and gas to continue, and they are the enemy, and it's anti-climate to let them continue, and they see the outreach to their kids as trying to brainwash the kids. They see the economic benefits as trying to buy them off at the expense of health and safety. And you guys haven't really talked about that directly today, and I'm wondering if you, maybe with XPRIZE, for example, you've seen examples of this where, there are approaches that have helped diffuse the situation, because they're basically going into this, the communities are feeling like they're not being brought to the table because they're not they don't care about the economic benefit. And then they're pushing back, and the project is you know, being threatened from the get-go before it's even getting started.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, we see that in a lot of places and in a lot of different contexts. And you know, the answer is it's like there's no silver bullet. It really is the long game. I think where we've seen teams start to succeed is where they really engage with the community early. Like this is before, you know, before there are really any boots on the ground. They're already trying to build relationships with those communities and understand the nuances and the history in those communities, right? Because no community is a monolith, and there's always nuances and you know, like you gotta know them before you can understand their perspective, and it just takes time and effort to create space for a productive conversation in that. And you know, I think this has come up a couple of times, but if you wait to have those conversations, then there is no space, right? Then you've got greenwashing on one side, and you've got misinformation on the other side, and it, you know, it can't get productive. So, I can't get any more specific than that. Although to say, you know, again, I think there's some good case studies out there and some good literature on how to approach those conversations. But maybe Todd, you might have some more experience in that space.
I will add just one thing.
Yeah.
It's really, I think it's probably critical that you have an entry point into the community that is a local institution. That needs to start out well in advance. I can just give you, for example, we are in the Pacific Northwest, so we are a very trusted institution. And we can go into just about any community in our region, and they know who we are, and they understand what we're there to do, and we're there to be a resource. So if you can identify something like that early on and make sure that they're in step with you and they know the pros and the cons, you got to talk about the pros and the cons. It's just not all great. There's always something that you have to deal with, some non-benefit. And just being up front in that space, I think, would get you a long way.
And if I can add to that, I think also trusting in and calling in more like the environmental agencies to actually monitor your work, because people, like I just recently wrote an article that says, has the title, I almost don't eat any sugar anymore, which is a lie. And then I'm pointing towards, like, it's very difficult to get people to trust you if you're monitoring yourself, but people have trust in open agency, in the agencies of the government agencies, and if they're doing a professional work and you get them to monitor you, I really think people would trust that more than you monitoring yourself and giving them the information from yourself, even if you are doing it very well. There's a long history of trauma also in the community which I represent, Landvernd, where there have been constructions that override community will, and it's still happening, and people are so afraid of that continuing, and rightfully so. So yeah, it's really tricky, and I think what I at least try to do as much as I can do is just to listen. It's a very common thing for mostly politicians to come in, and they think that they should do all the talking, and that will be beneficial, but it actually has the complete opposite effect, whatever you're saying, but it's to listen to the people and sort of understanding where they're coming from and going from there.
Thanks, and we are out of time. It's time for announcements and lunch.
Monitoring, yeah. the panel, outside monitoring. Very, very important. So I'd like you to give this excellent panel and the moderator a hand.